Welcome to Faith Works Live. Here's your host, Rebecca Haynie.
Hello and welcome to Faith Works Live. And I hope you can hear me smile because this is my absolute favorite thing in the whole world between you, me, and the microphone, to just get a chance to talk about what things that really matter. And about how to live out our faith in this crazy old, mixed up, chaotic world. There's a lot going on. And so thank you for spending this slice of eternity with us. I am overjoyed today to get a chance to reconnect with a friend, with a super smart lady. And one of my favorite things about our guest is just her infectious smile. Like if you see her smile, you have to smile. It's just one of those things. It's compulsory. And for all of our radio friends, you're just going to have to imagine the most awesome smile ever on the face right now of my friend and soon to be yours, Dr. Melissa Mork. She is our expert guest today. And we're going to talk about all things Christians and mental health. She's an accomplished author. She's a podcaster, and you can check out her podcast, the third season of which is soon to drop. So you got to subscribe now and catch up real fast. Melissa Mork, and that's M-O-R-K. Check out melissamork.com for all of her fine work. She'll be your new best friend. Melissa, it's wonderful to have you on with us.
Well, thanks, Rebecca. And I have to credit the smile to my orthodontist in Marshall, Minnesota back in the 80s. So that's where that fantastic smile comes from. My dad used to say we would drive past the orthodontist house and he would say, I paid for those dormer windows up in the attic right there. Those are mine.
I love it. And
thanks for having me on, by the way.
Of course. You're a super busy lady. I mean, I know you've got so much going on. I didn't mention you're a professor at the University of Northwestern St. Paul. It's where we met, and to the fine folks at Faith Radio Network. Just an awesome team over there. And so I got a chance to hear a little bit of your story and get to meet you. And I followed your work ever since then. But I wonder if we could delve a little bit into who you are and why you're so passionate about what you do, of some of your story and what people should know about Dr. Melissa Mork.
Well, just to kind of preface all of that, I was given a life verse. The Lord gave me my life verse when I was in graduate school. You know how you read the Bible and you all of a sudden you come across a verse and you're like, when did he put that in there? That's new. I never saw that before.
Yeah.
I was in grad school, and during devotions one day I came across this passage in Isaiah 50, verse 4, that says, the sovereign Lord has given me an instructed tongue to know the words that sustain the weary. He wakens me morning by morning. He wakens my ear as one being taught. And I thought, that's it. That is my call, is to know words, to seek out the words, listen for the Lord to give me the words to sustain the weary. And I think that we as a culture are so weary right now with the perils of social media and divisions on the political spectrum, and where we've come out of COVID and the pandemic. And it's just, we're so weary. And so when you asked kind of, we want to know why you do all of these things, it's because the Lord has called me to seek out from him the words to sustain us through this time.
Yeah. And that's such a good word, as all of his are. But especially, as you said, for this time, because when I think about it, that is a really good descriptor of my generation, the one coming up after me. I think we all are weary, and we don't always know why. And I think
that's no idea.
Right. And that's a big part of it. I think so many of us are Googling the answers to life, or we're putting it out there into the internet void and saying, please, random mob of spaceless strangers, can you help me decide my life?
Yes.
I mean, that's not really much better.
I've known myself to Google, why am I so tired?
Yeah.
And you don't really ever want to Google that because it's going to come up with cancer. But as an answer.
Everything. Yes, you have. Oh, why do we do that? And yet the one place where God has always said, you can always come to me, right? And yet that's almost the last place that we go is to God, either in prayer or through scripture. And I mean, I guess we're just wayward sheep all the way around, but still, like, haven't we learned by now?
That's right. To the very bitter end, we are going to be those wayward sheep. And I think we hope that those answers are going to come quickly, and it doesn't necessarily give us quick and easy answers to these questions. And why are we so weary? It's because we are living in the fall. Literally, we are victims of the fall. And so it is wearying until we are set free in our eternal liberation in glory. So, of course, we're tired. But in the meantime, let me find ways to encourage and give hope and little splinters of light in that darkness. So that's why I do what I do.
That's a good reason to get up in the morning. That's a good reason to do a podcast. You should subscribe to Dr. Melissa Morks, by the way. And you've also...
It's called Mental Health with Dr. Melissa Mork, and it's all about the perils of mental illness. So, yeah.
I wonder if you said mental health, and I have a dog in the background, so I will edit that part out. Sorry about that. She's very energetic. Thank you, Josiah. She loves to see the squirrels run on our porch, and they are significantly less excited about that relationship. She's
That's
awesome.
funny.
Yeah. Oh man,
that's really cute.
Well, and the name of the podcast is Mental Health. So that covers just about everything. I'm really glad to see more Christian focus on mental health, by the way, because that's that's where everything is. That's where the battle is. That's where our spiritual growth is largely. It starts in the inner man, as the King James would have it, right? It's all about what's going on inside. Right. And it's from the fruit of that, from our insides of what's going on here, that we have that, we see the fruit of our hands, that we're, that anything comes. It all comes there from that inner spring of where we are. And if our thinking isn't right, then there's everything else is going to come out sideways. And that's just an inescapable fact of life. But I think for too long we've tried to end around that and thought, well, if you just buckle down, if you just do the right things, if you just work harder, push on through, and some of those things, there is good classic wisdom there, like keep your hands busy, find those good productive hobbies, care for others, all of those things. But how do you know when there's some sort of mental struggle going on that you just can't, like you really need to fix it? It's not just about pushing on through or ignoring and moving on. How in fact do you move on in a biblical way?
Right. That's a great question. And I think you really pinned it down, that it's the thoughts that we are thinking that really influence our mental health and also can cause serious mental illness. And the Apostle Paul says we are to take every thought captive and make it obedient to Christ. And so that means if I'm walking around telling myself I'm a worm, I am a loser, I'm a joke, I'm worthless, I don't compare to other people, I don't measure up to the beautiful women at my church, I'm not a good enough mother. Like, you fill in the blank. It's those thoughts that inform how we experience ourselves and other people. It's those thoughts that can poison our spirit and make our relationship with God feel toxic. Like, there's a lot there in how we think about things. So your question is, how do we know when our mental health is at a place where it's no longer health, it's illness? Well, there are 4 Ds that we actually consider in the field of when is it time to go in and seek help, to talk to a therapist, or maybe seek medication, or both. And the first is what you're experiencing different than how you normally function? Like, if I'm not able to get out of bed in the morning because I am so depressed, or if I'm so anxious that it's turning into panic and I can't function well, and that's not how I normally am. So that's the first D. Is my behavior, am I different than how I used to be? And it doesn't feel good. The second D is distressing. Is it causing upset for me or for my loved ones? Am I withholding or restricting food to the point where my parents are panicked? Or am I erupting in anger and I'm yelling at my kids and it's stressing them out as well as me? Is it different from how I normally function, and is it distressing to me or other people? And the third D, is it dysfunctional? Is it getting in the way of my ability to do the things that I need to do, like feed my kids and parent my kids, or be in a healthy relationship with my spouse, or show up for work as my best self? Is it dysfunctional, what I'm going through internally? And the last one is very serious. Is it dangerous? Am I thinking about causing my own death? Am I thinking about hurting somebody else? Am I acting out in a way that is abusive to others? So is it different than how I normally am? Is it distressing to other people? Is it dysfunctional and stopping me from doing the things I need to be doing? And is it potentially dangerous to myself or others? If any 2 or 3 of those D's are met, it's time to go in and talk to somebody, either your psychologist, your psychiatrist, your family doctor, your pastor. You can find help through psychologytoday.com and just go on that website, and there's a search engine to help you find therapists in your area based on zip code. And you can even sift through by what you think your condition might be if you're feeling depressed, but also you can sift through by gender. If you want to see only female therapists, you can sift through for faith if you want to see only Christian therapists. So psychologytoday.com is a great place to access help if you're meeting some of those 4D criteria.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be scary. I think I appreciate, one of the things that I appreciate about this digital age of ours is that it's very easy just to reach out and to try. Like, hey, I just need to talk to somebody. But you mentioned specifically coming from a Christian worldview. And I think there's some interesting little twists and turns when it comes to Christians and mental health. There's concern about, am I not relying on God enough? If I'm struggling with these things, lots of times there's questions of faith that also come up from a Christian perspective. Like, if I'm really a Christian, why would I be having these thoughts, or why would I be having these feelings? So there's a whole nother layer to that too.
Right. And the thing is that mental illness is illness. First and foremost, it's just illness. It's neurological, it's brain-based. And, if you have to wear glasses, you're not wrestling, wondering what is wrong with me spiritually that I don't have good eyesight, right? If you break a leg, you're not calling into question your faith and your trust in God. You just go in and get a cast put on that bad boy, and then you let that cast firm up the bone so it can heal, and then you seek physical therapy to strengthen the muscles around it. So, my friend, the same is true with depression, is that just like the broken bone with a cast, you take your depression into the doctor and you get some medication to strengthen up the base, to get you stabilized, and then therapy to help you strengthen around that break. So, and I find that we struggle with this in the church. This is the whole reason why I wanted to start the podcast, was because of this very question of, is it appropriate? Is it okay for me to have mental health issues if I'm a person of faith? The thing is we are living in a fallen world, and we are going to illnesses, including mental illnesses, because it's a fallen world. And there's this myth in the church that my mental illness is a result of an unconfessed or unrepented sin. Is my anxiety the result of sin? Well, maybe. More often, though, it's the result of having been sinned against. I have seen so many people experiencing a trauma, and that trauma then causes the beginning of a mental illness. It kind of kickstarts our vulnerability for mental illness into gear. So is mental illness the result of sin? It's a result of the fall, and often it's the result of having been sinned against. And then it's sickness, like I said, and it's treatable. Every single one of our mental illnesses that are diagnosed, they're treatable. And so we don't have to live like that. And when we do get treatment, many of my guests on the podcast have said, suddenly, once I found treatment, my relationship with God suddenly pivoted to healthy and joyful and loving again, when I couldn't experience it before because of my mental illness clouding it. So there's that.
Wow. Well, that's really powerful. And that's like a whole show, even in its own right. So that's going to have to be for next time. We definitely want to do that. Like, oh, wow. Okay. That's an open window. I'll put a pin in that, and we'll come back to that later.
Okay.
But wow. So the level to which our own sin is involved, right? There's always some element, I think, of that, but you mentioned being sinned against, and then how we respond to that is all we can control. So I think in general in the church, at least we would say we have immense mercy and compassion for people who have been the victims of trauma, of horrible, egregious sin, offenses against them. But then learning how to heal from that, maybe we don't quite have all the pieces in place all the time, because what I'll just say from my experience, things like we hear about forgiveness, and you're supposed to be patient, you're supposed to be long suffering, to turn your trials into something of service to God, that God's going to do something through this, which he is. And yes, that's true. But I'm not sure we always get the how-tos in place. How do you forgive against something that wounds you so deeply? And I wonder if you could speak to that in terms of the practicality, like some practical steps. Obviously, getting qualified counseling would be a big part of that, but ways in which we can respond in healthy ways, even when we've been sinned against.
Yeah. I think, oh man, that's a long process, isn't it? It can be a really long process. And I mean, I would personally, because of who I am and what I do, I would say that counseling is a really big part of that. Trauma-informed care through talk therapy, EMDR to get through some of the larger traumas. But when I'm saying, like, my mental illness might be the result of having been sinned against, it's, maybe it's because I just went through a really bad breakup, and the breakup was good. Like, it was a smart idea. We should not be in that relationship. It wasn't a good relationship. And yet I was heartbroken at the end of that relationship. And then I slide into a depression. And so I don't want to make it sound like all mental illness is the result of some sort of massive emotional trauma. But, if I was raised in a family where my dad didn't really say, I love you, and now I just, I question myself at every turn, and I have anxiety, it's that kind of thing too. You know what I mean? And so, but I think now I go to see a therapist. My kids both have therapists. I think everybody should. If you have a primary care physician, you should also have a primary care psychologist of some sort, just to get us through the tougher times. And I think that they are skilled in addressing the symptoms of our mental illness by addressing what are the tough things that you're struggling with that you haven't found a way to fully cope well with. And especially for those of us who are Christian, how are we navigating how this parallels with our faith and with what scripture says to be true? I think that's what the role of a really sound therapist is. And even if you're seeing, like, my physician is not, I don't know if they're Christian or not. I hope so. I want to see them in heaven, but I don't necessarily need them to be a person of faith to treat me well. When it comes to therapy, all therapists, even if you're already seeing somebody and you don't know if they're Christian or not, as long as, a good ethical therapist understands every person's need for spiritual connection and a strong faith. Research supports the value of faith. And so every good therapist is going to encourage us to explore our mental health through the lens of our faith.
That's really good. And I'm glad to know that too, because I think is maybe some reticence there, from a Christian perspective, at least. Again, I'm speaking from my experience, that people might go to talk to a friend in their church or talk to their pastor, their preacher, something like that. But then to go to a counselor or go to a therapist seems like a bigger step. It seems like you're kind of admitting, hey, I don't have this on my own. There's something really wrong with me. And maybe there's part of that bigger fear that if there is
Right.
something wrong with my brain, then that just means I'm broken and I can't fix it. I'm beyond repair.
Right.
I'm defective merchandise over here. And that's not true. From
Right.
God's redemptive point of view, that is not true.
Right. And let me just speak to that. I agree. See, I use this analogy with my students often, is back to that broken leg analogy. So if I'm running around outside and I trip and fall and break my leg, I don't ask my pastor or my parent or my spouse or my adult child to carry me around from kitchen to sofa to bathroom to bedroom. I don't ask them to help me limp along on one leg. I take it to the doctor and I get that cast put on. because I care about my family and friends and I want to maintain healthy relationship with them. And I also want to respect healthy boundaries with them and not rely on them to support me in such a way that causes them difficulty. Similarly, if I have a mental health crisis, I can talk with my pastor and my best friend and my sister and my spouse, but I can't rely on them to fix it or to help me limp along without professional help. And going back to those 4Ds, if this is getting to the point where it's causing distress to my loved ones, I have a responsibility to get it looked at and to get it taken care of. We need to set pride aside. We need to accept that this isn't shameful. I haven't given up my dignity in walking into a clinician's office. In fact, I am following God's call to seek out wise counsel. So there's no shame in going to see somebody to help us through some of the harder times. Full stop.
Yeah. Great counsel from you there. Dr. Melissa Mork is our excellent guest today. Check out her website, which is melissamork.com. I'm saying M-O-R-K, just like it sounds, really. Dr. Melissa Mork.
Like Mork and Mindy.
Yes, exactly. And she's twice as funny for my money, but she's just an awesome lady. Check out her work. She's got a new book out, relatively new here this year, that I would love to chat about when we return. We're talking about Christians and mental health and how to know when to get help, the best way to help heal our brains and our thinking from a Christian perspective, because I think God does intend healing and wholeness for all of us. And that's a part of his vision for every single one of us. So that is there. And it's good. We're all on that journey. We're going to get a little closer together. You're listening to FaithWorks Live. There's no better time than now to stand for life. And you can stand with Iowa's original pro-life organization, Pulse for Life. They're the longest standing nonprofit pro-life organization in Iowa, and they're dedicated to informing, educating, and inspiring a new generation to value the sanctity of all human life, from fertilization until natural death. They serve at the State House. They educate in classrooms, at events. They proudly serve on the coalition of pro-life leaders. They are on the front lines of the battle against this throwaway culture of death that we see all around us, and we are winning ground. Hearts and minds are changing, and the pro-life movement is continuing to grow. And you can be a part of the exciting things that are happening right here in our own backyard at pulseforlife.org and get your finger on the pro-life pulse. Sign up for their newsletter, find ways that you can make a difference, and how you can change hearts and minds with their pro-life apologetics course, pulseforlife.org. Hey, what's for dinner? If you're like me, I hear that 15 times a day. And fortunately, I have a plan. It's typically Anonymous beef at our house. We are such big fans of Anonymous beef at the Haynie home because it's just great quality beef. There's no steroids or antibiotics. It's naturally raised butcher beef. They sell by the quarter, the half, or the whole, and they support your local meat lockers so they can help you get it processed in a way that works for you. In this economy, it's good to have affordable options for your meat. And if you're willing to make a good investment in your nutrition for a healthy menu plan, I highly recommend Anonymous Beef. Contact Dave and Mary Lynn at anonymousbeef.com. They welcome your questions. They'll help get you on the schedule. They have locker dates coming up. Don't wait. Secure your locker date today. Go to anonymousbeef.com. That's OHNEMUS beef.com. In today's world, security has never been more vital. And at FaithWorks Live, we're proud to partner with VeriGuard Security. It's a professional physical security service, and they're really raising the bar in security and private investigations. Whether you need a team of professional officers to protect what you have worked hard to build, or their mobile security units for multiple properties or large locations, from business or corporate properties to your home or neighborhood. Perhaps you've got an event coming up. They secure quality security coverage for events large and small, because it's about peace of mind and protecting you, your family, your team, and your property. Settle for nothing less than the best when it comes to your security. You shouldn't have to compromise. When it comes to security, you can trust VeriGuard. Contact them today at verigard.us. That's VARA guard.us. For security service, you can trust VeriGuard. When a woman faces an unplanned pregnancy, every possible emotion goes through her head. Where can she go for help and for hope? She can go to InnerVisions. Here in our metro, we have 2 healthcare clinics where she will find hope and help. From free pregnancy testing and STD testing to free ultrasounds, InnerVisions serves women and men with STDs who find themselves in vulnerable situations. They're completely free of charge because of generous donations from folks like you. And their medical clinics help their patients get all the information that they deserve that empowers them to make life-affirming decisions. That's what they do at InnerVisions Healthcare Clinics right here in Des Moines. Learn more at innervisionshealthcare.org. That's innervisionshealthcare.org. And you can call 24 hours a day at 515-440-CARE. That's 515-440-2273. Welcome back to Faith Works Live. Credit to my producer, Ron Carlson. Thank you, Ron. We couldn't do it without you. I'm glad that you're with us. And I think you'll be glad, too, when you hear from Dr. Melissa Mork, our excellent guest today. And Melissa, I don't think we've talked too much about your new book yet. It's called Bounce. Now, this is exciting. I want to hear all about it.
I'm very excited about it, too. It's called Bounce: From Surviving to Thriving Through Loss. And I wrote it after my husband passed away in 2017 of an aggressive lung cancer and leaving me to parent my 2 kids alone. And the thing is that I had done my master's thesis on bereavement and patterns of loss after I was orphaned in college. And so I thought for my master's degree, I needed to study grief. Was I doing it well? Was I doing it wrong? And so I studied it then. And then when my husband passed away, I thought, you know what, the academic component is great, but you know, when I've heard people speak about grief and they've never actually lost anyone close to them, it feels hollow. So this book is written still from the academic perspective of this is the research around grief. This is what we know about the stages and tasks of grief, and this is how it applies in real life to me, to you, to the people you love. And so that's what this book is about. It talks about the types of grief. Like, is it your grief over your mother who is disappearing through into Alzheimer's is a different kind of grief to the mother who gives birth to a stillborn baby, right? There are very different types of grief. And then I talk about what are the tasks, like how do we grieve well? What can we do? How do we actively address it? And then how do we cope with it? How do we find resilience? How do we use humor and playfulness and levity in our grief? And even how do we find meaning and purpose in this suffering? And so that's what the book is all about.
Well, and each one of those is such a critical part of it. It reminds me of what you said earlier when you talked about the result of the fall, and that so many of us are living with a weariness or with a fear or with the heaviness of grief in our lives. And there's a part of that, at least to me, that makes total sense because it's not the way it's supposed to be. When I've been walking through seasons of grief, it just feels like this loss is not what it's supposed to be. You may remember that we lost our young son, Gabriel, and it just a big part of that for me was searching for those answers because it felt like none of this is right. This isn't how it's supposed to be. And biblically, I think that's true. And then our souls, even whether we know God or not, are wrestling with the not rightness of a lot of this. And it feels heavy. And the loss can even be compounded sometimes by that searching for answers. That's a big part of it, I hear. And to deal with that, though, and to say, even because God is so good, that he can even use those, the worst consequences of this fallen world to then make us stronger, make us resilient, to teach us patience and hope through tribulation. And I'm honoring and praising God in the middle of all of that and figuring out, okay, Lord, I went through the worst thing that I can imagine happening in the world right now, whatever that might be for you. I know what it was for me. And saying, okay, well, how are you going to turn this for good? I believe you. I trust that you say, but help me, Lord, help my unbelief. Because right now I don't quite see it, but I believe that it's going to happen. And I would love if you would say a little more about how God uses even the most horrible seasons, circumstances in our lives to then refine us and to make us better.
Right. I think you nailed it. Man, I don't know that I can add anything to that. That's so beautiful, Rebecca. I think, it all comes down to trust, even when we don't feel it. Emotions, the heart lies, and our emotions are deceptive, but also they can be so intense and so strong. And what I feel right now feels like the final truth, like this will never change. And in fact, he uses it for good. And also, he gives us sources of comfort, even in the darkest moments. And when he does, if we cling to them, I'm going to cry. He, there were moments, and I'm sure you've experienced this too. There are moments in grief where you feel like it will never end. It will never get better. This is a permanent condition. And it's not true, because he is faithful and he brings us the deepest kind of joy through that. I read a book. One of my favorite books is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. He was a prisoner in concentration camps during World War II, and he observed that it was the men with faith who found purpose in their suffering, who had hope for the outcome, whether it be eternal glory or a smaller hope of seeing their wife again on the outside. But it was the men who held out hope and purpose, who persisted through to the end. It was the men who lost their hope, who lost their faith, who lost their purpose. They were the ones that perished, even if they had special privileges, even if they had extra clothing or shoes to wear. They perished because they lost those very profound, most deeply important facets that only God can provide: hope, purpose, meaning, and faith.
I think that's honestly just to zoom out for a minute from the very personal to the culture to the global epidemic that we see. I think that is one of the reasons that we see the most connected generation feeling the most lonely, is we've lost that hope and purpose. We see people acting out in like strange ways that we've never seen before, and the confusion at such a level that we've never seen before. I think it comes down to a search for meaning, a loss of meaning, identity, and hope. And we find those things ultimately as Christians. We know that we find them by understanding who we are in Christ and understanding the God, loving and returning to a relationship with the God who made us. But I think we're also seeing some of that dysfunction and that disconnection filter down through all the relationships in our lives. And the less connected we are, that's same old tool of the enemy, right? The same old, he tells us lies to get us disconnected, to get us to distrust God, who is the ultimate source of life. And then that disconnects us, and that builds distrust in all of our relationships. And just as you're saying that, realizing the connection between that and relationship and mental health and relationships, healthy relationships, I think that's huge. And I don't know that you can find that. I'm sure that, reading great books or finding great resources to help you with your thought patterns, that would be great as far as it goes. But I don't know, you tell me, you're much more qualified opinion on this. If you can actually achieve mental health, honestly, without it being held within relationship. I think that has to be a part of it, whether that's your therapist, whether that's your family, your church, all of those things. I think that help has to come through relationship. What say you?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We are designed. God said it it is not good for man to be alone. And it wasn't just in, marital partnership, but I think that generalizes to our need for belonging, our need for a healthy relationship, our need for connection, because that is where, during the pandemic, when we were all quarantined and attending church online, it was so hard to maintain relationship because it was all just through screens, right? And, and some of us have not been able to reclaim that kind of deep, high quality spiritual relationship with a small group or with a community. But how do we just think about this? How do we punish our worst criminals who are already in prison? If they do something wrong in prison, we isolate them, we put them in
Yeah.
the hall, we remove them from their community. When we are punishing a child in school, they're acting out and we need to put them back in line. What do? We put them in timeout, we isolate them from connecting with other kids. Our need for connection and belonging and social relationship is so intense that taking it away from us or being isolated from one another is devastating. And one of the symptoms, for example, of clinical depression is that we withdraw from it's a symptom that we would withdraw from people around us and we self-isolate, and that increases our depression. And Satan uses that to pull us deeper and deeper and deeper into ourselves and into that darkness. So I think the need for social connection is absolutely critical. In fact, without it, we die. We die. Yeah.
It's that same old. I find it so fascinating that I mean we can recognize these patterns, and even our body will start to recognize, like, oh, I think something's not quite right. But instead of moving toward, it's almost like you have to retrain your instincts. And maybe it's different for other people, but for me, I recognize what you're talking about. That I have to remind myself of good, healthy patterns. Otherwise, my instinct, maybe in my fallen self, is to pull away. My instinct is to say, well, you know what? I really just want to sit here alone in my room and binge watch BritBox TV, and because I love my Jane Austen, don't take it from me. But that goes well with cheesecake, and then nothing good kind of spirals out after that. Instead of saying, I need to go out in the sunshine, I need to take a shower, I need to go talk to an actual person, even from just like go be with
Yes.
other humans, and we have those instincts that pull us away
Yes.
instead of towards. So is that a spiritual thing? Is that something that we can retrain about ourselves, or is it a force of habit?
I think it's both. When I said before that a lot of our struggle is, of course, being the result of the fall and also sin, ours and others, and sickness, there's also Satan. And I think you said it earlier, he whispers lies into our ears, but what we do then is we believe them as our truth. We adopt it as our truth. And so if he says, you know what, that you don't like the way that person treated you after church on Sunday, you don't need to go back. And then I petulantly think to myself, you know what? I don't need those people. I don't need that. Jesus, I can just, have devotions and, and so I pull away. I think it is part of our human nature from the fall. And it takes actual intention to recorrect, to even overcorrect, to go back to the church, to go back to that relationship, to seek out those healthy activities. The last thing I want to do when I am feeling blue is to wrestle into my workout clothes and to go to the gym. But guess what? The best thing I can do for myself and my mental health would be just that, or going to the store and getting some nutrient dense foods, or lifting up my phone and actually making a phone call to talk to somebody and connect with them. The things that are the healthiest for us, sometimes we avoid because Satan just really wants to destroy. He seeks to kill and steal and suppress. So I think it's all of the things that you listed. And we know it's good for us. And sometimes in the midst of our mental illness or our struggles, we really resist and we need to seek out instead.
Yeah. Well, and understanding that, I think, again, factoring in that isolation is not good for us. And that's one of the dangers that can come about, especially in a more digital age. And for those of us who really care about the truth, because you're my people. I want to live in truth. And yet I think those two things can sort of we have to be checking our standard of the truth and our thoughts about the truth against what God actually says, and not our opinions about it, or not, some chat room or Twitter feed or whatever, wherever you go,
TikTok.
We all know, if it's Instagram, TikTok for you, that's where we have to be wary, right? Because we can get those lies filtered in, justified, in 4D anytime we want, and we can be influenced by that. In fact, I hear that's the one of the rising professions of this world, is to be an influencer. And I think checking another part of mental health, and I mean, I know you're an influencer, so I appreciate that. There's some good godly influences out there, don't get me wrong, but I'm not. I'm just a Yahoo on the internet with a microphone. But be that as it may, I know that I get alone with my thoughts and I start taking in those influences before I even realize it. And I'm not being influenced by the word of God. I'm not being influenced by that truth
Right.
in my life as often as I'm hearing these other this flashy distractions of the voices. And it's easy to start to twist even those things that you mentioned before, which catches me, because in God's eyes, there's a lot of Christians that are out there that have that worm theology. And while I want to tell the truth about the fallenness of humanity, I also have to listen to what God says about who we are in Christ. And that's very different. So you can't live as a worm and also as a child of an almighty God. That's just, those two things will start to conflict. They will start to clash, is all I'm going to say. But yeah, I think getting back to
Right.
what is influencing us. And when we're searching for the truth, we have to be basing that on God's truth and recognizing that our brains get it twisted a lot, and our brains start to lie to us, exactly as you were saying.
I want to address that statement of identity in Christ. And sometimes my students and we wrestle with, what does that actually mean? And there's an activity that people will do in group therapy that I absolutely love. And what it is that you take a stack of index cards, recipe cards, and on each one you just write down an identity that you hold. For example, I'm blonde, right? I'm a mother. I'm a professor. Each one has a different word. I'm a wife. I'm a sister. I'm a daughter, a child of God, and I just list all of these different roles that I hold, and then put them in order of the most important to the most frivolous, so I'm blonde. And then I have to imagine myself, take the top card. Would I still be me? Would I still be at my core me if I was no longer blonde? Come on. The next one, would I still be me if I was no longer a professor? It's a little bit harder, but can I imagine, would I still be Melissa? And imagine my life without that.
Mm-hmm.
And work my way down. And it gets more painful to imagine, would I still be me if I wasn't a mother? Would I still be me if I wasn't a Christian?
Mm.
And as I imagine myself removing those identities, it comes down to, I would not be me if I wasn't saved by Jesus Christ. I would not be me. That informs everything. It informs all of who I am in every one of the other roles, as mother, as wife, as professor, as therapist, as podcaster, all these things. That is at the core. My being a mother doesn't influence necessarily some parts of my life, a lot of them, but not all of them. But my identity in Jesus, that informs everything. And I think that, sometimes I hear that, we hear that phrase, my identity is in Christ. Yeah, but what does that really mean?
Yeah.
I think it's when we strip away all of those identities, that is the one that needs to be at our core.
And that's a good way to figure out who you really are and where you really stand too.
Right.
I know one of the difficulties of grief and loss, for example, is discovering who you really are, whether that's loss of a job, that you weren't expecting, that can be a really critical time for people. Who am I without this job title? Or, more painfully, loss of relationship, loss of a spouse, loss of a child. How do I go on? How do I function? Not just
Right.
because of that loss, but because now I don't know who I am. It changes so much fundamentally about who I am too.
Right. In the book of Job, I don't remember what the exact passage was, but he writes, naked I came from the womb, and naked I will return. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And he's talking about having been stripped away of all of the identities as businessman and father and landowner and, ranch. Like he had all these identities and they were all stripped away. Naked I was born and naked I return. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And I think that is such a statement of grief,
Yeah.
just as you defined it.
Yeah. And grief and honor. And it's so hard to imagine being in that position. I've always felt for Job. Man, I love Job, and he's a mystery to me all at the same time. And all the questions, he has all the questions. I have all the questions. I have no answers, just all the questions.
Right.
But he goes to God,
But
and he never abandons that relationship with God. Even when his wife is like, no, God's turned his back on you, just curse him and die, just get it over with. And he says,
right,
no, he's going to continue to go to God, even though he doesn't understand. And I just admire that. Like, that's a sermon every time I think about it.
yeah. Did you ever see Tim Hawkins' bit about Job, though, and how Satan strips him of everything good in his life, but leaves the wife
Yes.
behind?
It's like, there she is. That was so funny. Tim Hawkins is my fave. I like that. And it's such a funny lady too. I think that's something. I know we've got limited time today. And I'm sure we could talk for like 16 hours straight, but you've got a podcast season up already. So the balance of humor that's something that you are so uniquely skilled at bringing out. You're just a funny lady in general. God gave you a good sense of humor. And again, it's just something that it helps me cope so much with grief, with hard times in life. I don't know, I mean, people have different senses of humor out there, but I think that Christians, and I know we've talked about this in the past with our friend Bill, that Christians have to be people of good cheer. Like, where's the joy? It should be living in the house of the Lord. That's where we should be.
Yes.
We should be awesome. Like, we know how to deal with the hard times. We know where the hope is. And so we should be the ones with the smiles on our faces. And I think
we should be filled with mirth.
Yes. Combining that with the understanding the seriousness of life, but also where joy comes from in the first place. Why should we not rejoice in all things, as Paul says? So maybe if you just want to share a few of your measured and golden words about the benefit of humor in times of grief and hardship.
Yeah, well, it's important. It is actually critical because it is life-giving, and you nailed it. I mean, we are the ones most specifically called to be joyful and to embrace levity. I think I loved reading G.K. Chesterton's ideas about the resurrection being the greatest punchline of all time, sin being the setup, and how there's wrestle and conflict and strife, and we hit the deepest of despair in the death of Jesus, and then boom, guess what? He's back, and he's defeated. It's just an amazing idea. And so we are children of the ultimate punchline, in that this is where all levity and joy comes from. This is where all light and life comes from. In grief, I taught a class, an open online course we had like 5,000 people enroll in this course, and it was called Navigating Grief with Humor. And it told me that people were really hungry for understanding their grief, but also seeking levity and mirth in the process. And the whole idea started when I was at my mother's funeral, and the pastor stopped the service, and said, I want you each to turn to a neighbor and share a favorite story about Trudy. And it was kind of a stunning invitation to just sit and like share a happy story. And so pretty soon I heard whispers and sniffles, and then I heard giggles and chuckles. And then I was hearing snorts and guffaws, and people were laughing hysterically because my mother had been a funny woman. And what better way than to remember her with laughter? And what that laughter did was it opened up my heart. It released some of the pain. It acted as a balm on my spirit. And I realized if I was allowed to grieve her by remembering how funny she was, if I was able to laugh, I could get through this. And, sometimes the laughter isn't related to the person or to how we're grieving, but I have a dear friend who lost 3 sons in a car crash to a drunk driver, and her 2 remaining sons were young, like 8 and 12. And every night before bed, she would turn on a sitcom, and they would just sit and watch something light and funny. And then they would go to bed with laughter in their heart. It was just a way to bring them to a place where they could rest. So there's a lot of room for levity and laughter. It is God ordained. It is given to us. And I think that we need to seek it out and embrace it. It's good for our mental health, Rebecca. It's really good for our mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not just pasting over the difficulties of life or the hardness of life. Like we're facing it square on, but we're saying, you know what, there's joy. There's still joy to be had, especially in an eternal sense. But there's also joy in the here and now. Like the fact that, my son thinks he's Batman and put on 2, completely different, like he put on cowboy boots with his Batman mask. That's hilarious. And he's singing himself a little song as he's going up the stairs. That's the joy in the everyday. And God gives us because he's so good. He just lavishes this beautiful stuff on us. And I think opening our eyes to the mental, to having a healthy mind and a healthy mindset is the one that can take in, yes, there's horrible things going on in this world. Yes, the consequences of sin are real. Yes, we need to be sharing the good news of Jesus Christ, but that's it. See, it's good news. It's good news.
Yes.
Because of the hope in him, because all of that has been defeated in him. And all you have to do is come to him. And this is where new life and hope and fruitfulness and purpose and fulfillment can all be found. It's so good. And that's what we can live in. And that's where the joy comes from. So, oh man, so good. It's so good to talk to you.
Preach, Rebecca.
Yeah. It's all because of you, because you brought it out. Dr. Melissa Mork, she's so good at what she does. Y'all check out her podcast, check out her new book called Bounce. So you can find that. And that'll be awesome as well. Bestseller, I'm sure. It's going to help many, many people. Your course, Navigating Grief Through Humor, that helped thousands of people. I was glad to be, just a little bit in on some of those secrets there. And just a never-ending fount of fascinating insights and practical help is this lady. Check out melissamork.com. That's MORK. I'll link to it below in the podcast links too. For all of y'all hearing on the radio, check us out on the podcast, and I'll just make it super easy so you can get connected with her. Oh, Melissa, it's so good to talk with you. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, Rebecca, you are a joy, and it is really good to see your face online and see you around on the socials, and I just adore you. So thank you for letting me be a part of your hour.
That's very kind. Thanks for staying connected with us. I'm serious. If you want to come back anytime, you're welcome on our airwaves. We need more of you, of your voice, of your wisdom. So if you want to share your story again, just always, like we've just scratched the surface, I know. So thank you for listening to Faith Works Live. And remember, we have a mission: to fear God, to love people, and to live free.